Good day, digital world. Today we're going to continue to answer some very entertaining questions about assignment 2 and hopefully provide some helpful answers. Before I dig into some very helpful advice and some answers to your questions, I thought I would let everybody know I've created a playlist on YouTube for only the questions and answers for this data visualization module. So all the questions and answers are assembled together for all of the assignments on one playlist. And currently, or I just looked, there are 56 questions and answers on that playlist, and not including today's. So I hope that you guys find that helpful. Okay, so let's jump into the questions, the exciting questions. The first one, hi Bob, I have saved the Sally dataset to a binary file as floating point values and have confirmed that it saves correctly by reading the values back in. Very good job. My issue is that when I load the data in using my chosen volume rendering software, then it doesn't work if I interpret the data as floating points. However, it does work if I choose to interpret the values as unsigned bytes. The reason I'm emailing is because I was hoping you'd be able to take a look at what I see, the attached image. The result of rendering the data is quite interesting, which leads me to believe that there may not be an issue with the data conversion process. However, given that it's a mystery data set, I just wanted to confirm that what I see is actually the true representation of Sally. If this is correct, would I lose marks for the potential loss of precision from the conversion? Okay, so now, you have an implied question here, which is the result of rendering the data is quite interesting, which leads me to believe that there may not be an issue with the data conversion process. So that's not a question explicit, but based on my psychic powers, that is an implicit question. And basically, you can determine whether or not that's an issue with the data conversion process based on part 1, which is simply rendering a sample data set that comes with the volume rendering software. It doesn't matter which volume rendering software it is and which sample data set it is. You can confirm that at least the software is working in that way, and then decide whether or not your problems are with the data conversion process or with the software itself. Now, I've looked at your image, thank you for sending that, and I think that you are on the right track. I see some features that look like Sally. However, I see also some noise in your data, and I don't understand what the noise is. In order to understand that, I would have to understand how you created it. For example, what is color mapped to? What am I actually seeing? What are those data samples? And so on. But it does look like you're on the right path. And then your question about losing points for loss of precision. Basically, you won't lose points necessarily for loss of precision unless it causes major artifacts, aliasing artifacts. Remember, we talked about aliasing and we covered that in our exciting introduction to the Nyquist theorem. And as long as your images don't suffer from severe or really high aliasing artifacts, then you won't lose points. So I hope that answers the question. The next one, I have since, this is from the same, this is a follow-up from the same student. I have since solved the problem, so you can ignore my previous email. Well, I still answered it because I think some other students might have the same kind of questions, and I think it's very helpful to share the questions and the answers with everybody, right? And we can also get a sense of collectively how the class is progressing with this assignment. My solution was to scale the float values to be in the range from 0 to 255. We also talked about that in class. That is also called normalization, by the way. I'm a little concerned about the loss of precision, so my question still stands whether I would lose marks for this, or is it the case that as long as I can identify the data set, then there is no problem? And like I said, it's all about the aliasing artifacts. Now, those data samples from Sally and Betty, those are vectors, so they have 3 components or 4 components if you include time. The X, Y, and Z components, X, Y, and Z. So there's a set of regular Cartesian data samples on a Cartesian grid. There's an X component, a Y component, a Z component, and it's actually the sum of those, or the magnitude of those, that you're visualizing. So it turns out when you normalize those in the range of 0 to 255, actually you won't generally get aliasing artifacts because you're using all 3 of those values in a vector, and so those are 3 components of a vector. When you add them together, the aliasing artifacts tend to reduce as opposed to a single scalar value. But even with a single scalar value, probably you wouldn't see aliasing artifacts unless you zoom right in. Question number 3. Hi, I've been trying to visualize Sally for a few days now, and I don't seem to be getting anywhere. I have attached a few images of what I'm getting currently, but I do not think it's correct. I am storing the vectors created by GenSally in a BTK file format and using ParaView to visualize it. Any advice would be appreciated. Good. I'm glad that you appreciate any advice. So I'm going to just provide some comments. I'm looking at your image and I've seen your images. I think, well, one answer is I don't know, because I don't know how you generated those images. For example, I don't know what color is mapped to, and I don't know what the locations of those glyphs are based on. So without knowing that information, in other words, the visual mappings, it is more difficult, if maybe impossible, for me to tell. I can tell you one thing I do like about that image is the shape. So the shape has some characteristics of Betty. So my guess is you have some aspects correct and some aspects not quite correct. For example, you might be converting the X and Y components of the vectors correctly, but something has gone wrong with the Z and possibly time component of Sally. That would be my guess based on experience and looking at your image. Now, I have some questions that I think will help, questions for you. One question is, why aren't your data samples, it looks like, why aren't they on a regular grid? So again, Sally is a function, and you input into the function the locations of data samples, and I've drawn that here. So your first data sample really should be this position on a Cartesian grid, 0, 0, 0, 1, right? That's the time step. And the second position should be the next unit over, which would be 1, 0, 0, 1, and so on. So X is along the X-axis, so the X component goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, so to speak, or 0, 1, 2, 3, and then you move up to the next row, right? And that would be 0, 1, 0, 1. And so your data samples are at regular spatial intervals on a Cartesian grid. That's the idea. And I don't quite understand. To me, it looks like you have data samples, but I'm not sure because I don't know how you rendered it. But they're not on a regular grid, and I just don't understand why not. So it would be also helpful, you have a color scale there. I don't know what color is mapped to. To me, it looks like color is simply mapped to radius of a circle, and that is not necessarily correct. And how, like, what are the glyphs? You know, what are those glyphs showing that you have there? I don't know how they're positioned and what they're showing. So those are some questions I have for you, and if you could supply the answers to those, then I can try to help further. But I hope this little explanation helped somewhat. Next question. Bob, hi Bob, I just wanted to make sure I'm on the right lines with Sally as I'm finding this assignment quite difficult. So I've used GenSally to create a 1D float array of which every 3 values are the x, y, z components of each vector. That's good. Yes, you're on the right track. But be careful because there is a time component there, and it's up to the volume rendering software you're choosing to render the data whether or not they require this time step. And I recommend you just set it to a constant 1 in this assignment. My plan is to utilize the VTK functionality to write this as a VTI file so that I can import it into ParaView to visualize it. That's good. Would this be thinking along the correct tracks? Yes, it is thinking along the correct tracks. But keep watching because I'm going to provide more hints. In addition, it describes how to calculate the magnitude of each vector, but I'm not quite sure how to incorporate this. So to compute the magnitude of the vector, that is given explicitly in the assignment. Right there is in the hints section, the formula for computing the magnitude. Right, the magnitude of the vector is simply the x component, x squared, plus y squared, plus z squared, and then you take the square root. And that's usually denoted like this, the magnitude of the vector. And you'll notice that's just the distance. That's a simple distance formula, right? And that's given in the assignment as well. Oh, there's another question here. Lots of questions today. Just as an update on this, I've now simply output the results from the SallyGen straight into a comma-separated text file, which I am inputting into ParaView. I only have the x, y, and z values, and it seems I may need an additional 4th column for scalar value or magnitude value. I'm getting an image, but I have no idea if it's correct. You can send me your images, and I can try to give you my opinion on whether or not they're correct. To find out what that 4th component is, you'll have to look at the documentation to find out if that's supposed to be a time step or the vector field magnitude. I suspect it's supposed to be the time step, but I haven't checked the documentation recently myself. By the way, the VTK and ParaView are recommended partially because the documentation on these two software packages is very, very good. So they're very well documented. So finding out things about file formats and file input is easier with those tools. Dear Professor Laramie, watch out how you spell my name, by the way. I'm going through assignment 2, and I tried to make Sally and Betty to run. I relearn my C coding skills, although I don't understand how the vector field I am supposed to extract is returned on your scripts. I don't understand what Sally output is given I don't understand what Sally output is given. It is a void function. Also, my compiler finds errors on Betty and can't compile. Is there a chance that you can help me on that or provide a TXT file of the final data? It seems that changing data formats takes too much time if you are not familiar with the formats. Okay, I'm going to give you a very big hint here. If I was doing this assignment, I would simply, as one part, simply put print statements in the Sally function that print out the values, right? Really, really trivial. And then you can redirect the output to a text file and load it into different volume rendering programs. So you simply, enter the name of the program on a console, for example, a Linux console. You insert your printf statements for each value, and you redirect the output to a file called data.txt, for example, or sally.txt, right? That's a redirection operator. And there is a very quick and easy, trivial way of storing the Sally data in a file that requires the absolute minimal of technical skills or programming skills, right? It's 3 lines of code to insert the printf statements, one for the X component, one for the Y component, and one for the Z component, and possibly a 4th if you want for the time step, right? This 4th component redirected into a file doesn't require really any programming skills at all. So that's a big hint, and that is one way. And I would do that if I was a student. I would definitely do that so I could see what the values look like. You can load those values, those text values, into Excel and find out what they look like, right? You can just output a 2D array of one slice. That's what I would do. A 2D or 1D array that includes only one slice of the data, not even the whole volume, and start looking at it in Excel to see what it looks like. Really not very difficult at all, actually. Now for Betty, Betty is not a complete program. Betty is already given to you as a data file. It's already there as a data file. Actually, you don't require any, you could theoretically circumvent any programming with Betty as well. But you have to look at the metadata for Betty to find out what Betty's resolution is. And you can Google how to read .raw files. There are programs that read .raw files already, right? So actually I'm giving too much information here. And the code that you're given for Betty is how to read in, is the procedure how to read in .raw files. You may want to use that, but you do need to include that function in a main function, so to speak, if you want to do it yourself. So it's there. Now, we didn't want to take away all of the challenges in this assignment. So you mentioned, like, can you provide me with the text files of the final data? I've just given you a lot of hints. But if I provide you with the text files for both data sets, then most of the challenges in the assignment are taken away. And then the assignment becomes quite easy, in my opinion, like a little bit too easy. And you don't want that either, right? If I take away all the challenges, then basically the learning, the amount of learning that takes place goes way down the tubes. And then you have less education, and that's exactly why you're a student enrolled in a PhD program or a master's program. You're here to learn, you're here to be challenged. if you don't get challenged, you're not going to be learning anything, and then there's no point of us even being here at all. So I want you to think about that. Okay, thank you for sending in the questions, and I look forward to the next round. Good luck.